Pree Center. You may notice my colleague Paul Matsushima on the screen or in chat, answering questions and sort of helping us along the way. So we are part of the Pree Center. For those of you who don't know the Pree Center, it's new to you. Maybe you've heard of us once or twice. Let me just tell you briefly who we are and what we do. We are part of Fuller Seminary, and we exist to help leaders across industries respond to God in their life and work. In this season of life and work looking really different for most people, lots of people feeling what they do to be disrupted in different ways. We have focused and continue to do things that really resonate and speak to the moment that we're in. Everything from leading in a crisis to what to do in lockdown to Christian innovation to today's topic of designing your work life, especially in light of the pandemic. If you want to check out those resources and learn more about us, just head over to depree.org where you can see all that we're up to. Okay, a few instructions and kind of how we're going to do the format for today's webinar. I will introduce in all his glory Dave in a few minutes, but one of my very favorite things about Dave as a teacher is how interactive he is. And so we are going to lean heavily on the Q&A feature today in the webinar. I want you to start whenever you have a question, whenever Dave is talking, go ahead and drop it in the Q&A section. For those of you on a computer, Q&A is bottom middle of your nav bar. I believe on an iPad, it's in the top right. Any questions, anything that you might be wondering, drop it in there. And here's the part that's a bit different than maybe some of the webinars that you've been on or things that have been happening recently. We're actually going to call on you to ask those questions yourself. So instead of me saying, hey, Sharon from Washington has a question, we're actually going to alert you ahead of time that you'll have a chance to ask your question live. We'll then unmute you, and then you and Dave will get to talk about those things. So we're really looking forward to that, and I think that will go really well. So whenever you start to have questions, just drop them in along the way. So today we are here to talk about designing your work life. It's no shock, it's not new news that we are in a season of collective unknown and that we've all had to sort of quickly pivot in different ways. For some of us, that's been exhausting, others of us exhilarating, but for whoever we are, it's a lot of change and it's come really fast. And in many ways, we're just at the start of rewiring and redesigning what this is going to look like. And, as we've talked with folks, it's been interesting and striking to really notice how many different people are experiencing this pandemic differently. And in terms of work, it's playing out for those of us in really different ways. So it's a great chance to sort of sit back and step back and ask reflective questions. And there is no better person to help ask these reflective questions than Dave Evans. Dave is like I said, you're actually one of my favorite teachers, Dave. Every time I sit with you and listen to you, I learn something new. You have a long history of innovation, everything from Apple to tech execs to, of course, co-founding the Stanford Life Design Lab with Bill Burnett. And I want to hit just a couple of your resources so that our audience knows that how to access these things before we kind of hand the mic over to you.
Okay.
Dave has a brand new book. It's called Designing Your Work Life, and it's sort of a follow-up to the #1 New York Times best-selling book, Designing Your Life. Dave, this book came out just very recent, and in pandemic life, like sort of in the
right.
fog of who knows
when.
when.
It hit the shelves on February 25 and COVID US in March. So.
Okay, yeah, so in COVID times, I picked it up last week really to prep for this webinar with you, and I quickly found myself scribbling and underlining and having to think about how all of your wise comments and exercises and practical resources played out in my own life. So we hope that you will pick up, and we'll drop a link in the chat, Dave's brand new book. Dave is a friend of Fuller, an advisor of Fuller, and therefore has done resources and things with us in the past. He has a module and a resource with Todd Bolsinger on Fuller formation, and it's called Redesigning Your Vocation, Reframing Your Vocation. And it's where he takes many of the principles in the first book and matches them up with the Christian theology of vocation, and you get a chance to sort of work through reflective exercises. Those resources are free on the platform on Fuller Formation until July 1st, so I would encourage you to take a look at those. And lastly, if you have not checked out Dave's first book, if you are in that small minority of people, it is a New York Times bestseller for a reason. It is a book that I think I have bought and given to probably a dozen people in my life, whether they liked it or not, Dave, and recommended to many, many more. It is called Designing Your Life, How to Build a Well-Lived, Joy-Filled Life. And one really cool thing about Dave is even though Christian theology is not at the heart of that particular resource because of the audience it's intended for, he has created kind of a tag-along resource that goes with that he's given us access to that we've posted on our site. So we're going to drop links to all those things in the chat feature of this webinar. You can check those out as you go. But for now, I want to turn it over to Dave, reminding everybody to ask good questions along the way. Dave?
Thanks, Michaela. Very kind of you. A little overstated, but there you go. So hey, folks, welcome to Pree. You know, and yeah, I've been hanging around Fuller for a whole long time. About 50 years ago, I did senior high ministry with Steve Fuller, grandson of the founder. You know, all my brother-in-laws went to Fuller. My daughter went to Fuller. She works for, I mean, we're just like at Fuller up to here, you know. So we're really happy to hang out with the Pree folks. And today we're going to do a couple of things. I'm going to talk for, I think, between, 25 and 30 minutes. I've pulled stuff from 4 different places, jammed them all together. So it's potpourri morning. And I don't actually know how long this talk last because I've never given it before, but we're going to give this a shot. So let me bring up the old screen share. What is life without PowerPoint? And then we're going to run through some stuff, and then you get to have a bunch of questions. Okay, is this the right one? Here we go. Click this, and I got to click that, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. Okay, so we're going to talk about a couple of different things. We're going to talk about discernment, work design or redesign, and all of that in light of COVID, and I've got like 4 jobs because I can't decide what to do when I grow up. So where do we begin? Where do we begin this conversation? Well, as I chatted with Michaela about the time today, we wanted to start with this question, about, how it starts. And, in Silicon Valley, where I hang out, mostly where we start, and we're Americans, we like to do stuff. So have a really cool idea, and then to get some initiative, to go take that idea and move it into reality, have some faith, have some confidence, except that's a profoundly worldly way to do things, and it's not Christian at all. And so that's the problem, because the model we've been given is to be always responding to a godly invitation, to the prevenient, always present God who is always moving. If God goes before us into Hades, much less, into, Sunnyvale, then very likely where you're thinking about going next or where you are presently residing, God was there first. We're not the start of things. We may be the start of the next thing, but we're not beginning from nothing. This was true for Jesus. Very truly, I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing. Whereas one of my most important mentors now, late into his 80s, not that far from transitioning, if you will, says, Jesus, the least creative man who ever lived, it was just follow, 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 follow. And that's supposed to be us too. So what does that look like? Okay. That I think presents for us, particularly those of us who are professionals, people who hang out at the Pree Leadership Center, a real challenge ideologically and practically, which is to move from initiative to invitation. And I think theologically that moves from permission to presence. Let me explain this a little bit. And I think it's a huge shift. It starts with me. Let's go have some initiative. Let's have an idea and get something going. The old phrase, are you running with me, Jesus? Like I've got this thing in mind and I'm going for it, and it certainly feels Christian and it looks Christian and the world needs it. But that's entirely different than have I actually had the experience of God is moving and inviting me into this thing. Because in initiative, all I need is permission. And what I mean by that is thinking up a Christian thing that's theologically legitimate, that appears that the world could use it, is incredibly easy. We are drowning in legitimate needs, and thinking stuff up Christianly, frankly, isn't that hard. And so you have maybe noticed, as have I, there's an awful lot that God could be doing. Many would argue God should be doing that so far God is not doing. So just, I would like to, and I can find myself intellectual permission to rationalize it Christianly, both for the world, for myself, and for Christian theology and the Bible. Coming up with that mix is easy. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that fits that model that God's not doing. Now, God may be more patient with some of these things than I'd like, but I'm not in charge. That's over my pay grade. So then I have to move into the presence of the reality of God as I perceive and understand that, informed by a variety of sources. And that shift from think it up, just make sure it meets the rules, to experience an invitation that is rooted in the presence as well as in the theology of God, that's a big shift. Now, what I think that looks like, and what I'm doing here is, the whole question of discernment, for many of us, we hope it looks like, a Shazam on a nice bright yellow brick road, and we know where the Wizard of Oz is and the city of Oz, and let's get going there. But very often it doesn't look like that. What it looks like is this. It looks like a mess. And for many people, what used to look like that now looks like that because of this pandemic. And the world, the city of clarity, has been completely rearranged. So most of us are in this place. So the task is discernment. What Christians call coming up with what to do in a situation like that is called discernment. What's that got to do with design thinking? I mean, there's the Stanford design guy. Where's that coming from? Okay, let me briefly talk about that. That's covered at some length in the Christian Companion to Designing Your Life, a 14-page white paper that's free and you can download, and that's in the links Mikhail is giving you. But a brief introduction would say, first of all, design thinking we often describe as a set of mindsets. It's a way of thinking. And those 5 mindsets are radical collaboration, reframing, curiosity, mindfulness of process, and bias toward action. Let me briefly describe these, and particularly describe their Christian root. In fact, a minor correction. Michaela in the introduction said, that designing your life, doesn't have any Christian theology in it per se, but it's Christianly based. That's actually incorrect. It is full of Christian theology. In fact, it's entirely Christian theology. It's just not explicit Christian theology. The word theology simply means truth about God. Okay, so if we describe something in the kingdom of God truthfully, then it's Christian. Now, the fact that it doesn't sound religious per se, and the language in designing your life is inclusive and implicit, doesn't make it less Christian, just makes it less recognizably Christian. So what we're thinking about here is a very large understanding of common grace and the common good. So we begin with curiosity. That's the power tool. Why? Because this is the animation of the human longing to understand and to move forward and to learn. Paul reminds us, we see through the glass darkly, but later face to face. We are drawn constantly forward to the moreness that meets the eye. Curiosity is the word we use to describe that generically. It is an essential component of the imago Dei, the image of God. We want to lean into that because there is a holy presence in that curiosity that longs for the goodness that lies behind the moreness than we can see. Now, I'm not in this alone. A radical collaboration in design does not mean I collaborate with radicals or I do it radically. It means radically inclusively. It means you have to hear all the points of view before you really understand. It's really essentially a position of humility. In liberation theology coming out of South America, they will argue, unless you have heard from the voice of the widow, the poor, the oppressed, the orphan, and the prisoner, unless you have heard from what I call Jesus's preferred constituency, you have not heard from the voice of God yet. You have not heard from the Spirit of God yet, because God is specially with those people. And in every situation that you find yourself, there are people who are the unheard. There are the voiceless. There are the oppressed. They're the people who are not getting their fair position at the table. And unless they're part of your collaborative, at least investigation and empathic listening, you haven't heard yet. Now, if you're going to do that, you run around the circle and you really radically collaborate, guess what? You're going to learn stuff you didn't know you didn't know. You're going to have your point of view change. You're going to end up reframing. Jesus is the great reframer of all time. Over and over again, he says, you have heard it said, but I say unto you. That's just the Aramaic style of reframe. The reframe is, you've heard, you were thinking about it like this. What if you looked at it this way? That's what a reframe is. And the collaboration with curiosity has a humility that invites you to a reframe. We do that with a mindfulness of process. This is not happenstance. This is not random. We're walking through the becoming a disciple means people learning the way. Christianity isn't a thing, it's a way. It's much more of a verb than a noun, which leads us to bias toward action. You live this faith. Jesus said, go. He didn't say think. Quickly, find all the passages where you find Jesus sitting together with a large group of scribes working on the 5th editorial version of their statement of faith. You don't see a lot of that. I mean, he hung out with some of those people, but he mostly gave you an idea, then said, go and do it. We're biased toward action people. So this is where designers come from, and frankly, it's where Christians come from. Now, best way to understand design thinking, I think, is to contrast it with other kinds of thinking. Kinds of thinking are just really tools. So we have engineering thinking. I have 2 engineering degrees where you solve your way forward. You have enough information, you have enough equations, you can actually get the right answer to a stable problem. It's great when it works. There's business thinking. I'm sure a lot of people listening in are business people. Now in business, we're never right and we're never done. You can never make the customer happy enough. You can never make your profitability, your efficiency high enough. If you're a nonprofit, you can never hit your change metrics clearly enough, but you can get better. In fact, if you go to the right business school, you can get better quantitatively, and you can optimize your way forward. It's an optimization approach to thinking about things. In research, we do a lot of research at Stanford in a methodology going all the way back to Aristotle and Plato, which is why we call it the academy. That's what Aristotle called his school in Athens. An academician is a student and a child, a long down the line offspring of Aristotle, and a methodology about how to create knowledge. And we do that in analysis, a very specific form with dependent and independent variables and peer review, and this whole process called research to create rigorous knowledge. These are great ways to think. They're powerful tools. But there's a huge class of problems they don't work on very well, called wicked problems. And wicked problems are problems where you don't know what you're looking for until you find it. And it keeps moving around. It's entirely customized. Once you solve it for one person, that solution is unique to them. It does not work for somebody else. It's really the human class of problems. And for that, design thinking, where we build our way forward, we know we don't know, we know that we do not know what we're doing. We know that we're going a place we've never been before called the future. So we have no data on it. And that's an empirical process. And all you can do is you can try and iterate and live into it. So it's an empirical lived experience. It's literally, it's a praxis. We talk about orthodoxy and orthopraxy. Design thinking is a form of orthopraxy in innovation. It's an innovation methodology to come up with a new idea that really works in the real world, and that's what design thinking is about. In fact, Todd Bolsinger of Fuller and I were sitting in the coffee house at Stanford years ago, and Todd kept trying to figure out why we got along so well. I mean, we fell madly in like just instantaneously. And finally, we were chatting about this very idea, and Todd goes, "Oh, I get it. Because design thinking and what's called practical theology, which is a theological school of thought, are essentially exactly the same thing, just with slightly different semantics." I said, now we know. So we're practical theologians here. Okay, now, if we want to act like life designers, Christian life designers, a particularly helpful model would be this one, I would argue. It's navigation versus wayfinding. You navigate, this is what your GPS does in your car. When you know where you're going, you have the end point in mind, and you know exactly where you are today, and you know the data about all the space in between, you can optimize the space in between, you can find the right pathway, and you can navigate there step by step by step, and it works great. But when you don't know exactly where you are, and you definitely don't know exactly where you're going, you don't have the end fully in mind, you don't need a GPS, you need a compass, and you need some persistence, because you're going to take a step at a time and then learn some more and take another step at a time and learn some more. And you iterate this process. And it's very nonlinear. That is wayfinding. And in fact, wayfinding as a technical term is a design thinking approach, and navigation as a technical term is an engineering approach. And I think this points up what I believe is a deep form of stress for, frankly, everybody in the developed world, especially thinking serious biblically minded Christians, because we've allowed ourselves to confuse faith with certainty. If I'm really faithful, I know. No, if I'm really faithful, I know that I don't know, but I can act with courage anyway. And I ought to be able to figure this out and get it right. Engineering has been such a powerful tool, frankly, since before the Industrial Revolution, that we've solved virtually everything. It becomes the default way of running into a situation. Like, well, what do we need to do here? What's the right answer? How can I fix this? Those are questions engineers ask about what are known as tame problems, well-bounded problems for which there's adequate information to solve it. Wicked problems, like discerning what to do next with your life during the pandemic, are not solvable. You cannot engineer your way forward. You have to design your way forward. So it is an ambiguous process, but it does actually work. Now watch my hands. If I'm trying to go from here to what ends up being here, and I'm navigating, here's the path. Zoom. Nice straight line. That is the shortest distance between those two paths in a navigation context. In a wayfinding context, I'm going to go from here to, I will end up over here, which I don't know at this time, by the way. I'm going to end up over here. Here's what that looks like. Well, I'm going to go here, and then what do I learn? Look at Paul's second missionary journey, by the way, if you want to see a pathway. It looks just like, I go here, nope, stop. Here, nope, stop. Wait here a little bit, jump over there, land in Troas, have a dream, take a boat, go across and land in Thessalonica. Okay, so it's boom, 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 boat ride, land. That path is the shortest distance between those 2 points in a wayfinding world. When you literally don't know what you don't know, that's what it looks like. And you imagine there's a straight line that somehow you blew, but it doesn't actually exist because you don't know where you're going yet, and you can't. Very often, God is the just-in-time discernment supporting spirit. So this may be a mess, but getting good at that is what stepping up to being, a Christian life designer looks like. Okay, so this is the whole issue of discernment, which we define as decision-making integrating more than one way of knowing, mediated by the Holy Spirit. Okay, I'm going to pick it up a little bit here. Now, in terms of ways of knowing, there's lots of ways of knowing things. There's cognitive knowing, which our society is very good at. And then there's affective, non-cognitive forms of knowing, spiritual, emotional, intuitive, others as well. There's kinesthetic body knowing. There's social knowing, collective consciousness. These are all things that epistemologists, people who study how we know, can understand. And you want to access all of these forms of the human condition, all of these ways whereby God can make his revelation evident to you in your discernment process. Okay, now where do we start? Now here's where I'm because I'm doing 3 things, not 1 this morning. I'm sort of going to jump to the end. This feels like a big leap without an adequate buildup, and that's because there's an inadequate buildup. I'm going to jump to the answer. The world of discernment is a tricky one. There is no definitive book of discernment in the Bible. We reverse engineer how people have discerned, including Jesus himself, by watching their lives and taking notes. And then for 2,000 years, the tradition has been trying stuff out, what people often call spiritual technologies, i.e. spiritual disciplines and discernment action and spiritual formation. All these things, spiritual discernment, are all tools people have developed over time for efficacy and orthopraxy to see if they actually work well. So you've got to do some work to come up with a toolkit that works for you. So I've taken a look at a bunch of the history of discernment tools and processes and the stuff from design and put it together into a 4-step process. This is Dave's recommendation for an integrated 4-step design discernment process. Walk in the way expectantly, listen for longing, cultivate the sacred imagination, and lean into the leading. I will briefly describe these, then we're going to jump on. Walk in the way expectantly. Do you believe God speaks? Do you believe the kingdom of God is real, and those invitations, not just your initiative, but those invitations I talked about, exist or not? Or do you have the anticipatory mindset of Simeon, who stood on the steps for decades waiting for God's promise to be fulfilled? When you live that way, and then you are listening for a longing, for the voice of your heart, too often, the heart gets a bad rap, it's a primary organ. It's the seat of your will where God can speak. Have you learned, with Dallas Willard, how to hear God speak in your prayer life? So you listen for that longing. And when a longing begins to form, then we cultivate the sacred imagination. We kind of come up with ideas, not all by ourselves on the couch, but out in the world, in collaboration with one another and the Holy Spirit, and then lean into the leading, or in design, we'd say prototype. That's all about, hey, take a staff and a bag of goodies and go to a town and give it a try. See how that goes for you. So we actually try these things rather than I'm going to stop and go to the ministry. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to live on beans and rice for 2 years. I'm going to get my MDiv from Fuller. Then I'm going to go see if somebody wants to hire me. That's kind of not leaning into it. That's jumping out the back of the airplane without a parachute. So when I cultivate that sacred imagination, the next step is to try lots of small things in the real world and see what the feedback loop is. I would say that those prototype behaviors of trying things are the act of giving the Holy Spirit a chance to give you some feedback. It's the petri dish in which the Holy Spirit can grow something to show you what's going on. Okay, so that's, and by the way, those discernment steps incorporate all the mindsets of design thinking, as well as a lot of the history of Christian discernment. Now, what happened after we, we wrote the first book, it became this bestseller, and we sold almost 600,000 copies in 23 languages. And then we wrote this other book. Michaela mentioned this other book. So this Thing 2, Designing Your Work Life. Well, now, why did we write that? Well, we wrote that because people are stuck at work. One stat that makes it 69% of US workers, 85% of global workers are disengaged, meaning work is not working for them. That's huge. That's horrible. So we got a problem here, and people are stuck, in a variety of ways. I mean, employees are stuck, managers and companies are stuck, gig workers who are, of course, proliferating like crazy. And unfortunately, the unemployed are also stuck, which is a rapidly growing group. And they're stuck on all kinds of things. They don't like their job. It doesn't feel meaningful enough. The politics of the office are making them crazy. And then there's this whole pandemic thing. Now, I'm not going to cover all that because we're doing 3 talks, not 1 this morning. But those are the kinds of things that come up and we start talking about in the new book. Now, the new book doesn't have a chapter on the pandemic, but we've got videos on that separately. Now, the biggest idea in the new book is this one. Don't resign, redesign. Give yourself a better job. Before you go through the incredible pain of trying to find a whole new job and a whole new company or start something, are you sure you can't make it better right where you are? Now, the underlying strategy behind this one really is useful in a variety of forms. And I'm going to just run through it briefly. And the whole time I'm talking, by the way, feel free on any of these topics to type a question into the Q&A panel. And later on, Michaela will be cherry picking some of those and ask you to come back. So I'm not going to do Q&A till the very end. So with 3 talks built into one, take your chance to write Q&A along the way. So don't resign or redesign. What's that look like? Well, we have 4 strategies to have you get unstuck in the job you're currently in, including the same strategy could be used to find the new one. It's reframe and re-enlist, remodel, which has 2 forms, a cosmetic and a structural, relocate, and reinvent. Now, very briefly, reframe and re-enlist means literally doing the same thing you're doing now in the same place but for a different set of reasons. You completely recontract between yourself and the person in the mirror what this job is all about. I've been through that a couple of times. Remodel means right where you are, without a new job title, without a new boss, usually without even getting permission from your boss, because you don't need to. You can cosmetically or even structurally adjust how you do what you do and even what you're doing, just by being attuned to what are the value add opportunities to the organization that could be affected from the position of authority and influence that I currently occupy. Most companies don't mind getting more for the same amount of money from you. Relocate means I literally get a new job internally, but one that I probably have access to with my current skill set. I can make a direct transfer of that, a particularly big transition process. And reinvent means I got to become a whole new person. I'm going to go back and maybe get another degree or a certification of some kind, and jump out of one thing and into another. In fact, in the book, we tell 2 stories, 2 real stories, both about accountants, Chris and Oliver. And Chris was able to relocate from accounting into marketing without having to go through a big transition process. And Oliver wanted to go all the way into branding and creativity stuff. And he went from tax accounting all the way into marketing and brand development, but he had to get an MBA along the way. And so there are different ways people make these transitions depending on the circumstance. So there's those 4 ideas. And in particular, the last 2 use the exact same 4-step process, which I'm going to briefly provide to you. That 4-step process, which is designing your life or designing your work life simplified. We were sort of forced into this over time as we wrote the book. People kept saying, well, hey, one time we were about to go on TV in Canada after like a 7-minute interview, which got knocked down to 3 because they were behind. It was live TV. And they said, we need the book in a sentence. I said, dude, we're Stanford instructors. We are not known. I in particular am not known for 1-sentence answers. And he said, well, then you're off the air. I said, give me a minute. It's actually 4 sentences, but it's only 10 words. And so here's the 4 simplified steps. And frankly, if you don't want to read the book, this is it. So just jot this down. Get curious, talk to people, try stuff, and tell your story. And by the way, I'll point out, prototyping is a big deal in design thinking. The middle 2 are both prototyping, talking to people and try stuff. You put these together in a process, what we call the virtuous cycle. So what am I curious about? Hey, let's go talk to people and find out from them what's it like being at a leadership center. Michaela, you were doing consulting and stuff. Now you're doing this like seminary thing. That's pretty weird. This is not, hey, can you hire me at Pree? That's a transactional conversation. This is talk to people, get the narrative story. By the way, if you're actually looking for a job, the best way to get a job is not to ask for a job, it's to ask for the story. Everybody has a story, so your chance of getting yes to, could I hear your story, is much bigger than, could I get a job from you, or could you hire me? So get the story. Then as you're talking to these people, hey, could I try, let's try a webinar. I'm not sure I want to go on the faculty at Fuller just yet, but let's do a webinar and see how that works. Try things, ride along, small projects. Again, get your feet a little bit wet. And then as you're doing that, you're learning, you're paying attention. As Christians, we're reflective, thoughtful people. We believe in growth. We believe in growth that actually is something you can understand. And so then when people say, tell your story, that story isn't, well, I just, binge watched all of Game of Thrones last night again. Okay, that's not the story you're telling, but your story is like, gosh, they've really been pivoting the Pree Center at Fuller, from leadership to an expanded faith and work conversation. They're doing stuff. They're already moving online in this pandemic thing. Wow, that really put steroids on that. And I was talking to Michaela, and they're having this interesting experience with what conversation people want to be in with the Pree Center. Well, that's kind of what's going on in my life. What's going on with you? That's a tell your story that's context located as a learner who's giving their curiosity legs and taking it out for a walk. That's what we think the process is all about. So you repeat that process more to get more engaged, and then you're designing your life and your work. Okay, now that's the summary version of that thing. So that's literally a 270-page book in 10 words. Now, then what happened? We're almost done with all 3 talks here. Well, then COVID happened. Literally a couple of weeks after the Designing Your Work Life comes out, bang, COVID hits the streets. And immediately the world started asking us, how do we design our COVID life? Which initially I said, well, it's the process isn't any different. It's just a pretty different circumstance. People wanted more than that. So we've now actually got a video series and a YouTube channel on designing your COVID life, where we're trying to dial in what we're doing here, specifically around the incredible challenge of this time that we're all living in. And the tagline I changed a little bit, how to thrive and change and stay generative during COVID. So I'm going to show you what we did with that very briefly. And in particular, I want to show you 2 ideas. Then we're done. So in designing your COVID life, we have a 5-step process. I took the 4-step process I just gave you. Get curious, talk to people, try stuff, tell your story. And we tweaked it just to intensify the particular needs that might surface during this unique season that we're all living through, which is generative acceptance, manage mindset, reach out, keep trying and learning, tell your story. Now you recognize the old 4 steps because they're all in there. The 2 I've added are generative acceptance and manage mindset. I'm going to double down on those a little bit, which are sort of the starting place instead of curiosity. Then reach out is talk to people, only I'm emphasizing the initiative taking. You've got to reach out. Do not let yourself get locked in. I'm in an 8x8 office, by the way. And if I just sit in my little box, it's going to get pretty dark and dim in here. I've got to reach out. You got to take more initiative. For those of you who are introverted or don't have big networks, that feels like the activation energy is huge. And that's a big and important step. Then keep trying and learning whatever you can do. If you've been furloughed, right? We got 5 adult kids, 4 married, 8.5 grandchildren. I've got all the way from the head of housekeeping for a hotel system who's been furloughed with 90% of the staff to a team lead developer at Netflix in the family who's of course working nights now. So where you are in this thing, maybe all you can do, this picture is a woman, cooking online with putting up a little webinar with a camera, doing cooking, learning how to cook online. Try something, keep moving and learning, which is retaining your humanity, and so your story has something in it to tell. And once again, that process is generative, or we call a virtuous cycle. You put all those things together. And what I'm really focusing on here, rather than just taking your curiosity for a walk, we're saying taking your bias toward action for a walk. It's very, very tempting right now to become inactive. I mean, physically inactive, where can I go? And you want to keep that going because that's going to keep you generative. We believe in generativity as Christians. We believe that life matters. We believe in leaving the campground better than we found it and engaging in the world and with one another. So you've got to keep that going. So repeat that process to stay generative. Now, in particular, I want to jump into just 2 things on generative acceptance and managed mindset. This came up for just 2 weeks ago. We were talking, Bill and I were talking about this and said, we're noticing a whole bunch of people on this COVID thing are starting to get tired of it. Like it was working okay, I'm handling it pretty well, you know, all things considered. And then like a week or two ago, I see her more and more like, I had it, you know, I'm done with this. So the first tool set people were using were starting to wear thin. And we have a hypothesis about that. And this has to do with generative acceptance. You can accept things one of three ways, by the way. You can accept it oppressively. Okay, I'm a victim, do it to me. I guess I'm getting mine. That's an oppressive acceptance. There's a suppressive acceptance, which is where you stiffen up, you go, I got it. It's the heroic acceptance. I've got this, don't worry, I've got it. I'm going to suppress any personal experience of this thing. You know, I'm impervious to all that, and that's going to break, and it's going to be a mess when it breaks. And then there's the engaged or generative acceptance of like, okay, well, where do we go from here? And that one asks the question of where are we? And it's time for a reframe. So this guy named Bill Bridges wrote a famous book back in the 80s called Managing Transitions. He's like the transition superstar, and he's really good. And he would say that it is not the changes that do you in, it's the transitions. Change is not the same as transition. Change is situational. The new site, the new boss, the new team, the new policy. Transition is the psychological process you go through coming to terms with the changed situation. Change is external, transition is internal. I think it's a useful characterization because what we're all facing is, where in the COVID am I? Well, something is ending. For many of us, maybe the whole job is over. For many people, certainly it's going to be way different. And so what we want to do is get into the new world, the modified world I'm going to go back to, or the entirely new world I haven't even penetrated yet. And how do I get there as fast as I possibly can? We're having people ask us all the time, how do I beat this thing? How do I get first in line? I want to get there quickly. I'm tired of this. The problem with that question is it doesn't work, because this shape is not how change happens. Change happens this way. From the end, you go through a place called the neutral zone before you go to the new beginning. This is as old as any wisdom tradition in the world, certainly including the Judeo-Christian tradition, where we know that it is, you know, creation, fall, redemption. It is, you know, birth, death, and rebirth. There is going through. You go through hell to get to heaven. So you can't not get lost to get refound. You can't go from found one to found two. You go from found to lost to found, and it's hard and people don't like it. And what I think I noticed in my own life about 10 days ago, that I suddenly started getting really grumpy about all this COVID stuff. And I went, uh-oh, I think I know what's going on. I'm not in the neutral zone. I have not really accepted that this change is occurring, and my life is never going to be the same again, not entirely, because I've been in the waiting room. I'm just waiting for it to be over. And then I can get back. Listen to how people talk. Can we reopen again yet? You know, will this start? Will we be able to restart? The framing is to return to what was. And for most of us, it's not going to be what it was. And so if you're waiting to go back to that thing you don't want to end and you don't want to lose, you're probably going to get disappointed, as opposed to entering the neutral zone, because that is where we actually are. And that is the place where you can actually design with God what the future might look like. But you can't collaborate with God there unless you are there. If you're just waiting, you're not teachable. If you're letting go and into the neutral zone and knowing you don't know, you got an opportunity. So, and the thing about managed mindset, I'll just briefly state, you know, as Philippians reminds us, whatever is true, noble, right, whatever is pure, lovely, admirable, if there's any excellence or praiseworthy thing, think about these things. And then the God of peace will be with you. We have known as Christians for a long, long time that where you send your brain really matters. It was never truer than now. It was never truer than now. So with that, so 3 talks, basically, what's discernment all about? What's it got to do with design? Because we're all discerning something. Then how would you redesign on the job? Well, here's 4 quick steps for how to do that and 4 different strategies for how to redesign, which might even be usable to look for something new. And oh, by the way, this COVID thing, what's up with that? Well, the key thing about that is we're in change and you got to be ready to manage it. So with that, we got time for some questions.
Oh, Dave, that was amazing. Wow. Okay. So I'm digesting that. I'm going to ask a first question. Before I do that, I want to remind you to type your own questions in. We've already got some people on deck, but now is the time to start sort of thinking what you might want to ask Dave and typing those into the Q&A spot. Dave, first of all, thanks for correcting me. Of course, Designing Your Life is a Christian book, just because it doesn't use
better,
Christian
Michaela.
language. I know better. I'm a practical theologian. I would love to blame that on, sort of being on live TV, but I think we'll just call that an error.
Blame Todd. He's not here, so we'll blame Todd.
Just blame Todd. Yeah, I love that. So that's, thank you for that. Okay, so I want to ask a question to get us going here that links a couple of different things you talked about. At the very end, you said, most of us are not going to return to the world of what was. Our work's not going to look the same. And in order to sort of move forward, we're going to, it will be helpful if we can adopt this wayfinding posture.
Yep.
And part of getting to that wayfinding posture is through this, what I love that you're calling generative acceptance. As I've heard you say all that, the thing that kept ringing in my mind is like, man, that's a lot of work, a lot of soul work and emotional work. And it's going to require us to cultivate some sort of persistence. One of the things I love about designing your work life is how much you talk about the practice of reflection. And I'm wondering if you can make a link between the job of reflection in light of that task that you just gave us going forward.
Yeah. I've been telling people lately, this time is a great walk your talk test. You get to find out whether or not you believe what you say you believe and whether or not you understand what you believe. And so the real question is, what does it mean to be a person? What does it mean to be a Christian? I mean, are we supposed to be succeeding and accomplishing the particular image of instantiating the next movement toward God's dream for flourishing in the world that I had in mind before, or frankly, just hit the quota for the third quarter in my insurance company, whatever it is? Or am I simply supposed to be walking out as responsibly as I can today's invitation? Each day has enough trouble of its own, Jesus would say. So I think if we really buy that, then there's a great line by Jean-Pierre de Caussade in The Practice of the Sacrament of the Present Moment, where he says, all God is ever asking of us, of course, is to do all of his will all of the time. What could be easier? And I go, what's easier? Because of course the God who loves you would never ask you to do something you cannot do or cannot see. So let's say right now, you're furloughed or you're, remoting for a while and your company's trying to figure out what to do next, and you really can't see, and you can't start a job hunt or a repositioning yet, because the people who are going to make the decisions to create that invitation for you, they don't know what they're doing yet. They haven't got a budget yet. They don't know where they're going yet. Nobody knows. What are you doing? Nobody knows. Well, you do what you can. And that is literally all God is asking of you. So there's a whole thing in chapter 2 on good enough for now. No, it's not good enough, but is it good enough for now? So can I accept generatively that I'm living in an incredibly bounded time? In fact, Bill and I came up with a spiritual discipline. He's an atheist, but we do spiritual disciplines. And that the daily mantra is, I am in the neutral zone and experiencing transition. And every choice I make today can be good enough for now. Because if that's all you can do, then that's all you can do. And the measure that you're accustomed to unconsciously at the end of the day, kind of going, was that a worthwhile day or not? Doesn't work. So you really have to do the big reframe of, I am living in a global neutral zone. I am doing what I can do within the constraints of my finitude, and I'm living into that. So so to actually make this practical, literally every single day, you got to remind yourself where you're living, because you're going to snap back, and then say, and what can I do today? And then at the end of the day, practice the prayer of examine, if you will, the prayer of gratefulness, and just going to go, what did, not did I do versus what would I have done if all this wasn't going on, but how did it go today anyway, including the waves of grief we're all going through, which make you stupid and make you ineffective. I mean, I've always been productive and inefficient. I've always been able to cram 2 hours of work into 4. Lately, I'm cramming 2 hours of work into 9. 3 days ago, I had one of the most inefficient days of all time. I was sure I'd get it done by 11. I thought I meant AM. It literally took till PM. I did not allow myself to eat until it got done. It took 11 hours. So, you know, a little grace. A little
I
grace.
love that. I love that question of how did it go anyway? And just asking that question and spending time and imagining that that is closely linked to moving into the neutral zone is naming that every day.
Is reality
okay,
okay with you? It's okay with God. And the only place you're going to find God is in reality. God lives in reality, not in fantasy. So if you want to hang with God, you've got to get into reality.
If you want to hang with God, you've got to get into reality. That's so simply said and profoundly a wayfinding task. Okay, we're going to go to John next.
Okay.
John Kim, are you unmuted and can you ask your question to Dave? Here he comes. I see him.
There you go.
There you go. Great. Hey, Dave. Can you hear me?
Is this the John Kim on 45th Avenue?
I am not.
Okay.
Yeah. But not.
Keep going. I know a bunch of John Kims. Keep going.
Appreciate your time and the work that you're doing and the energy behind it. And so I've actually led a couple groups through the Designing Your Life group and the book itself. And it's definitely helped shape my own journey as I've walked alongside others. But now as I'm going through a pretty significant transition of my own, I'm actually finding it kind of tough to go through the book independently. You've actually addressed some of this, with the walk your talk test.
Yeah.
I find that I'm great at giving advice, but not as great in following it.
Yeah.
Definitely really good at challenging others, finding it hard to challenge myself. And so just want to see if you have any advice on how to reframe my thinking around going from a leader to a learner.
John, can you help me in a particular point you're getting stuck on, either that feels like it's not working or you're just having a hard time getting yourself to get the gumption to do? Where are you getting stuck?
Yeah, I've got a lot of really great opportunities. I have a lot of things that I'm involved in right now. And really the discernment, around that sacred imagination that you were talking about. I think I've been jumping from, change to change rather than a wholesale transition. And so really, going into the neutral zone, I guess, and doing the work there instead of just trying to leap into that new beginning.
Yeah, I would say, okay, so if John's got a couple of opportunities and he's sort of ping-ponging around a little bit, and wants to do this well. One of the lines Bill and I use all the time is set the bar low and clear it. Right? I believe in co-creation with God. He's given us agency. Hendrik Burkhoff in his systematic theology talks about we have is it a subject-object relationship or a subject-subject relationship? That we are alongside but underneath God. God is still certainly superior in the relationship, but it is truly collaborative. So, when you've got that sort of too buzzy and too many things, if you slow it down and try to come up with prototype engagements, not just thinking about, but other people you can talk to in these different organizations or in their fields, and ways to get your feet wet a little bit, try this, try that, try the other thing, so that now you've got some empirical evidence and you can, prayerfully reflect on and journal and talk with others and talk with your mentors about those experiences to say, what am I really learning? And am I in fact sensing God pulling one more than the other? It doesn't always happen, by the way. We could cover that separately, but what you want to do if you're trying to figure it out, and just get to it, like get across this neutral zone as fast as you can. It's not going to work. And one of the tricks is to make the neutral zone a place. The reason the slide says you are here, it's not just a way station. It's not a waiting room. I mean, a waiting room is a nowhere between a there and another there. If you treat the neutral zone as a there, we are actually here. Something important is happening while we're here. It's a formational space. It's liminal, but it's formative. So actually enter into it and fully, richly, because if the question is always, is that it, is that it, is that it? You're going for resolution at every moment. Stop it. Go for learning, insight, and gathering, and defer. In design, we talk about flare and focus. Flare is gathering, not in judgmental mindset. And then focus is when it's time to judge. You're in flare now. And slow it down, learn and grow, wait a while until you say, well, which one do you think it is? Not today. Give yourself a chance. This is where people talk about the silver lining of COVID, which I think is a little patronizing, but it's forced reflection. You might as well get the benefit.
Got it. Thank you.
That's good. I think, when in doubt, by the way, Michelle, we're going to go to you next in just a second. When in doubt, especially when all of this stuff is sort of coming up for us, slow it down is never a bad place to go. Where we anxiously move faster and faster, sometimes as a result to our own defensive mechanisms. So slowing it down is great advice. Michelle, are you there? Can we unmute you and have you ask your question to Dave?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, Michelle, what's up?
Hi, Dave. Thank you for your words today. I was really curious about your comments about this neutral place, and you just remarked on this a little bit, and making that a place and not just a waiting room.
Right.
And I was thinking earlier about your statement related to the idea that transition is something that happens internally in tandem with an external change of circumstances. And so I'm wondering what kinds of psychological postures, you might say, would enable movement into a space of new beginnings from this kind of neutral space.
Sure. There's the old line, nothing happens until three conditions are met. You're willing, ready, and able. And one thing I noticed in churches, by the way, is when in doubt, jump to able. Why aren't people evangelizing? Why is the youth program not working? Oh, I know, we need better tools. Let's have a training program. Let's run a retreat. And very often the problem is not able. The problem is ready and willing. And ready is mindset, and willing is intention, and then able is capacity. And so to get the benefit, to get into the neutral zone, the first step is the humility of accepting that it is a place with a somewhat differentiated, if not for some of us, a brand new world on the other side that we can't see. And what I need to gather now properly to optimize my outcome, I can't discern. So I'm just doing the best I can. And so humility, the word, the Latin root of the word humility is the same as humus, as in ground. Humility is not self-deprecation. Humility is availability and openness and teachability. So the stance of teachability and availability. So it really begins with what is. The God of is, not the God of should. The world should be doing it differently. If you're living in the land of should, nothing's going to happen. You live in the land of is, okay, I am sheltering in place. I am only going to see these 3 or 4 people. What can we do now? And zero base, if you will, our assessment of that. So I think the thing that I would optimize for getting into the neutral zone is the humility of being available to what is in front of you. That's why the line is, and every choice I make today is good enough. So it's giving yourself a chance. It's really hard to do, by the way. What I'm noticing for myself and others is, no matter how productive or energizing a day seemed to have been at the time, I get to the end of it like, what was that? Like it's all sort of, cold leftover oatmeal. Nothing really seems to matter. So I think there's a deep invitation to an ennui that we really have to battle against. And I think at least daily, if not a couple of times a day.
Thank you for that.
It's really helpful, Dave. I think we've got time for one more question. Let's go. Seth, are you there? And can you ask your question to Dave?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, shoot, Seth, what's up?
Great. Hi, Dave. Been a big fan for a long time, and similarly to John, and finding myself great at coaching other people through this stuff and hard at taking my own advice. So I'm in a situation right now, and I think a lot of people are in, of being newly jobless. And so when I think about the process of discernment that you've just described, a lot of times it feels like, well, that's great when you have something stable that is paying the bills right now, but it might end up taking an uncomfortably long time when there's a lot of urgency around, having to provide for family and all the just practical considerations. So I was wondering how you, for those of us in a season like this, how would you go about, prioritizing or figuring out which factors to prioritize in your job search? I think you touched on this a little bit with being available to what's in front of you. I think that's a mark of humility, but yeah, just curious what thoughts you have on that.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. It's on a lot of people's minds, and it's a really, really hard question. I'm sorry to hear that you're among the 40 million unemployed in this country, which is probably half reported. We are about to surpass the percentage of unemployed people from the Great Depression. So this is huge. This is absolutely huge. And we were not made to be unemployed. We were made to be workers. So this is not merely an economic crisis, it's a human crisis. First of all, the folks at CFW, the Center for Faith and Work, a companion institute to Pree at a Redeemer Church in New York, Missy, the director there, put together a 2x2 matrix on the pandemic and which groups of people are affected which ways, and what degree of social mobility have you got, and what degree of, so you're a programmer at Netflix, that's one thing, you're a service worker in the hotel industry, that's another. One of the estimates from the CDC recently was that for families with a family income under $50,000 a year, the unemployment rate there is 50% or higher. So the worse it gets, the worse it gets. So in the face of that, first of all, we got to tell the truth. If you find yourself sliding down Maslow's stairs, and food and clothing and shelter are at risk, it feels like discernment is for the elite. What I've discerned is my kids are hungry and I got to fix that. And that's, it's not some lofty, airy-fairy, bring Jesus back thing. This is like, take care of the kids. So I think for people who are in trouble, you start doing what you got to do in a hurry and get really practical. Now, that being said, once you get past the sort of the crisis management of that stuff, then, and it's not obvious where I go next, I think you really have two paths you can take. One is, boy, I'm pretty sure the part of the world that I was employed in before, the kind of work I did, is either going to go away or shrink so badly that the opportunity space there. So I'm a good candidate for a poor opportunity. And maybe that's not the best calculus. Maybe I'm now a new candidate for a better opportunity. I got to do a jump shift. And maybe that looks low probability, but that low probability of the thing I'm unfamiliar with is actually a better probability than the very low probability of the thing I know really well. So if you're in that spot, right? So one of those two spots. So let's say I'm I want to go back to the same world, but it hasn't reinvented itself yet. And they're not hiring yet. So you can't ask the transactional question. You can't look for a job because they're not hiring. So if you're in that category, what you can do is, this is where the talk to people and try stuff really, really, really matters. In the book we talk about, in fact, in the new book, we go back to Kurt and update the Kurt story, the guy that, took 60 conversations to get a dream job. What you can't land a job that nobody's offering, but what you can do is position yourself as top of mind. So if you engage in the exploration, get the narrative story sequence of what we call prototype conversations going, and I mean dozens and dozens of them, because everybody's stuck at home with their LinkedIn open and current and with their Zoom account fresh. So having conversations has never been easier. You probably can't close the deal, but you can be top of mind. Now, if you just pivot into the new category, that's where you got to do some homework and start looking at, okay, what does the busier part of the world that I might be able to penetrate into, what's it doing? And how might I be of use there? And that's, again, where the exact same process of reaching out, networking, and getting personal conversation, because you come knock on the door at Google and you've got no background in high tech, and you're just going to go through the resume AI screening thing, you're bottom of the pile. So if you're making a jump shift, you're going to want the human advocacy of someone saying, I know Michaela's really been, like in this academy thing, but I think she could really work for us over here. I mean, years ago, one of my wife's best hires in high-end enterprise software sales was picking up a guy she met who was selling used RVs on a car lot. He did not have anything that looked like he could sell Oracle quality enterprise software. He was a top performer. She was able to perceive this guy has what it takes, and she was able to open the door. So that if you want somebody to open a door for you, you got to go find that person. Best way to do that is through a series of networking conversations. Not networking to, can you help me get a job? But networking to, oh, Michaela, I've done the research. You're so interesting. Tell me your story. And you have to do that a couple of dozen times before somebody wants to say, young man, I think we want to talk to you. So it's a bunch of work. but it does work.
That's great, Dave. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. That's
Good luck with that, Seth. That's hard work, man.
Even that example you just gave right there is it's a story of hope. It's a story of outside the box thinking. It's a story of wayfinding, you know, both for that man and for your wife looking for talented people. Dave, we are just so grateful to you for teaching us today and walking with us and guiding us. Everybody, if you're at all like me, you're going to want to like rewatch everything that Dave said, because he packs a ton into a small amount of time. So we're going to send out this video so that you can be nerdy like me and watch it 6 times and take notes and share it to your friends. And in case any of you, you know, are interested, I feel like in this very last little bit, a theme that we didn't quite name, but that came up is a theme of resilience. And that is actually a webinar that we're going to do next week, spiritual practices for resilience in these times, with Todd Bolsinger. You can find information for that on depree.org. We so value your participation, Dave, and attendees, and we're grateful for you. Check out our work at depree.org and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everybody. God bless.